May I now invite Samida Sharma, Editor, Emerging Business and Startups, ET, onto stage. Samida, can we have you on stage? Hi. And to join Samida in a discussion that is centered around the theme, The Next Frontier, Building Digital Businesses for Bharat, may I invite our panelists. Nandan Nilekani, Co-Founder and Non-Executive Chairman of Infosys. Kalyan Krishnamurthy, Group CEO of Flipkart. Amit Agarwal, Global Senior VP and Country Head, Amazon India. Aditya Ghosh, CEO Oyo, India and South Asia. And last but not the least, Piyush Bansal, Founder and CEO, Lenskart. Gentlemen, Samida, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks a lot for being part of the 5th edition of the Economic Times Startup Awards. As we've already sort of summed up, the theme this year is building how digital businesses are building for Bharat. I'm going to just break this down into two parts. One, what are the challenges and how we can overcome these challenges across different stakeholders in the ecosystem, whether it's policy, regulation, infrastructure building, etc. I'm going to start with Nandan. I know you were a little baffled why I wanted to start with you, but you're the foundation guy, you're the infrastructure person. You have really been the architect for building a lot of tools for digital inclusion, Nandan. Give us a sense of how something like Aadhaar, eKYC, now with a customer aggregator program, etc. How is all of this really translated into businesses benefiting from these railroads? And do you see a lot of it impacting and going into tier 2 and tier 3 and beyond?
Sure. I think all the infrastructure that has been laid out in the last decade, it's exactly 10 years, it started in July 2009, is all at population scale. So the idea is to reach 1 billion people. So it is actually for Bharat to make sure that each and every person in the country is in that system. And the first thing, of course, was identity. 1.2 billion people have the Aadhaar number, and that's a very important instrument of inclusion. But there's also the eKYC, which allowed you to open a bank account or get a mobile connection in 2 minutes. And that's been a very powerful tool. The country has done about 4 billion KYCs across all product lines, bank, telecom, and so on.
Right.
And then the DBT also has been a big part. The Aadhaar number linked to the bank account, there are about 600 million bank accounts. And that has had about 5 billion transactions cumulatively since government started. So I think all these are instruments to bring everybody into the system. But I think we have to recognize that there are very many different markets, and maybe we'll come to that later. For example, when the whole payment thing was happening, we are trying to visualize how do you get payments to 1 billion people. And we divided it into 3 markets. We said those who have smartphones, which may be 350 million people, those who have feature phones, which is maybe another 300 million people, and the rest who don't have any phones.
Right.
And our goal was to get payments to every one of them. And for the smartphone people, folks, we had the app story. And we have many people here, PhonePe, Paytm, Google Pay, Amazon Pay, WhatsApp Pay, and so on. So that is served by those apps. Then we said we should also provide UPI on the feature phone so that those who have feature phones can make payments.
Right.
And for the people who have no phones, they had the Aadhaar-enabled payment system where you go with your Aadhaar number and you can withdraw money from your bank account.
Sure.
Interestingly, the middle one never took off. So we have about maybe 100 million people using UPI on their smartphones. We have 100 million people using AEPS to withdraw money in a village, which is absolutely India 3. But the middle one didn't take off. So I think often when you think about it, what you think doesn't happen the way you think it happens.
Yeah.
But I think all these things that have happened, and I think Mr. Prasad is here, so. Good, sir. I think all these infrastructure over the last 10 years will make it easier for anyone who wants to take products to Bharat.
Right. We'll anyway address some of the issues that can be handled later on. But Kalyan, if you want to come in and talk a bit about how consumer behavior itself is very different when you look at India and what a lot of people call India 2 and Bharat. And how are you sort of adapting to it as a business? Because specific to e-commerce, a lot of the initial 50, 60 million consumers are already on board. The next big challenge is to get people to transact beyond that 60 million. So how are they different, and what are you doing about it to address that large population?
Sure, Samita. So let me just get into answering your question in 1 minute, but before that, I'll also give some data to validate the discussion itself,
right.
the topic today. So when we look at our business today at Flipkart, 65 to 70% of our customers and transactions come from Bharat. So the real India, tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities. So at Flipkart, actually solving for Bharat is not a strategy, that is the business. And we have initiatives for, let's say, solving for the top 6 cities or top 8 cities, but 80 to 90% of the company's resources, financial resources, technology resources are already going towards solving for Bharat. Let me give you a couple of more data points and then I'll answer your question also. So the consumer e-commerce market in India today is roughly $23 billion in value. I think the only person who can disagree with that is Amit if he thinks it's a different number.
Is it? Do you think so? What are your numbers, Amit? You're not very fond of giving numbers, but...
Yeah, you know me very well.
Yeah.
If
but we will still try.
Yeah. If he thinks it's less than, which means we are gaining market share. So I think it's, yeah. So it's going to be, it's a rare opportunity to sit next to Amit on one stage. So I thought I'll use that opportunity.
What's your comeback, Amit?
Yeah.
Are you
No.
losing market share?
As you know that we don't really obsess about competitors.
Yeah. So
Goodbye.
yeah. So the 23 billion number now probably in 4 to 5 years becomes 75 billion. If you just look at the last 12 months, people who shopped for products
Right.
on commerce marketplaces, maybe 100 million plus, and this probably becomes
These
300.
are transacting users?
Transacting buyers for products on marketplaces, maybe 100 million plus in the last 12 months. This becomes about 300 million in the next 4 to 5 years. The incremental $50 billion of value and $200 million of users, 70% of those are going to come from tier 2, tier 3 cities. That's our estimate. So I'm agreeing with you on the topic to start with. So this is just validating the discussion itself. I think life depends on solving for Bharat. Now to answer your specific question. So there are 2 ways to look at it, or the way we look at this is in 2 ways. First of all, access, and second is affordability. Access, there is again 2 parts of access. One is digital access and second is physical access. Digital access is how do consumers access the app itself and what they see there. And it's changing dramatically, right? So just the size of the app itself, what it should have been before and what it should be today, for optimizing for the Indian user today, it's very different. Second is the way the content is served. It has moved from text to images, and we believe the future is video. And video means voice and speech in a pretty big way. The app talking to the user in voice and speech, the user talking to the app in voice and speech, and eventually an interactive experience. That's probably what's going to come in the next 1 year. And finally, I need 1 more minute if it's okay. So, and finally, payments, it's going to be very big from an access point of view. I think a huge amount of work is being done there. So that's on the digital access. On physical access, I think even today, we are reaching to the country. So Flipkart today reaches to 20,000 pin codes of the 23,000 pin codes, I think. So we are just getting there from a reach point of view. The future is going to be very different. How do you provide value-added services? Because Bharat is not a do-it-yourself market like the top 10 cities are. It's a do-it-for-me market, right? So you cannot just deliver a product. Actually, you have to service. You sell a television to a Bharat customer, you have to tell them how to use it if it's a smart TV. You have to install it for them. So that's the big part of access. And finally, affordability. How do you have a portfolio of products which, so let's say a foreign company is coming into India, brands, footwear brands, computer brands, phone brands, how do they use data to make products specifically for the target market? That's the biggest part of
So
affordability.
I'm going to get Amit on this, and we were having a chat before we came on stage. There is obviously the consumer side, which you want to address, and then, you know, your partners, your sellers. How do you kind of also tune your business that your sellers are also following, you know, that mission statement of getting deeper into markets? Because your selection, everything has to be very different, right? So how are your partners sort of aligning on that vision, which you have for India too?
Yeah, I think one of the really transformational things that are happening in our generation is that everybody is wired with mobile internet, right? So when you talk about the basic infrastructure, and on top of it, what Sir talked about, the payment infrastructure, all these are, in my opinion, the basic building blocks that if you think about now Bharat as a supplier or a manufacturer or a seller, you have millions of them now empowered to essentially reach out to consumers anywhere in the world. So the ability for the seller to reach out anywhere in the world requires some basics. So you can, you know, we used to have this program called Amazon Tatkal, which actually used to be a van that used to go to all remote parts of the country trying to sign up sellers to come and sell online. It is all about online education, trying to digitize their catalog, and then we expanded that to trying to get ecosystem around them. If you look at photographers, labelers, there are all these ecosystems. There are also entrepreneurs who, if you give them the right tools, they will help these suppliers, if you may, to come and sell. So I think there are all these basic building blocks. Then you actually need a little more sophisticated programs, and I can talk about one program like global selling. I just happened to find so many people who came and said thank you because they build their brands on top of that product that allows them to sell anywhere in the world. Wow was one example, that inspirational story. So if you just remove all the friction, customs, clearance, logistics, the amount of innovation that can actually go abroad and in exports is a big part of enabling this Bharat, of the manufacturing in Bharat. I think if you focus on the basics, you have very dedicated programs. Another program that we are very excited about is the aggregator program, where you can get the artisans and the women entrepreneurs on Amazon. We have stories about lost arts, and these are the transformations of Bharat make sense if it really changes people's lives. Otherwise, it's just a transaction.
Right.
So we are seeing those transformations happen, and I think just investing in the basics, trying to teach people how to do it, and then building these specialized programs that allow them to actually get a lever, in some sense a multiplier, using online commerce on top of this fundamental building blocks, in my view is the where
So I'm going to get Aditya and Piyush on the omni-channel and the physical part, which seems to be one of the other themes that we've been tracking. A lot of the very pure digital businesses are now seeing a lot of convergence with physical. Oyo actually started as a digital marketplace aggregating budget hotels, but over the last 2 years, it's more a real estate player, leasing properties, etc. I mean, and you've done it at scale. You've seen in tier 3, tier 4, and beyond. What have you seen, and what is the reason for this change to have happened? Is it to get scale and to reach those markets, those deep sort of corners of the country?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Oyo is a full stack hotel company. Nandan was asking me, so what's the difference between you and Hilton? I said, we're just a little bit larger. But
Valuation also.
But you weren't always that
right.
way. Yeah.
So I think the decision that we had to make was who keeps control over or influence over the experience that the customer is going through. And we decided that we needed to be in control of what the customers are experiencing, and then build a business around it. Especially in the context of what you're talking about, in say November, December last year, which is only about 8 months back, we were in 280 cities in India, operating hotels in 280 cities in India. 8 months later, we are in almost 600 cities in India. That means that we went in We found the hotels, we found the properties, we transformed those properties, brought them up to the standards, put operational folks there, started running the operations and revenue management and so on and so forth. Now the way we are able to therefore at this scale and at this speed, I'm able to solve for the consumer, I'm able to solve for my own operational teams as well as my franchise partners or asset partners. This would not have been possible without a huge tech play, right? Because the way we kind of think about it is we are in a space where three spheres are intersecting. One is consumer technologies, the second is real estate, like you said, and the third is machine learning. So that at great speed and at even larger scale, we are able to come back and offer a very consistent experience in an omni-channel way across, like, naturally out of these 580 cities or so that we are in India today, where we are running our hotels, what, 15, 20, 30, 50 of them, less than 10% of them are so-called metro tier 1 cities. So this would not have been possible without completely reinventing the business, thinking of the business in a completely different way.
Piyush, you've always followed the omni-channel model. What really have you gauged from your experience? You're in smaller cities, you're also in larger cities with your stores. How has physical presence helped you, target that audience, which a lot of digital businesses haven't been able to sort of get on board and get those consumers to transact? Has your physical model really helped you penetrate those markets?
Yeah, so I think, I have never really thought about business as omni-channel or singular channel. I think we started with a very clear vision to give vision to India to, because there are 600-700 million people who need spectacles and only 170 million of them wear spectacles. And as we got along that journey, that how do we give specs to, even half of that 600 million, we realized that the only way to do it is to be omni-channel, right? I don't think we made that choice, we made that choice along the way, but what I fundamentally believe in is that, whether I look at India or I look at any global evolved economies now, whether it's China or US, every economy is divided into three parts, right? There are people who are not digitally influenced. There are people who are digitally influenced but not online shoppers. And there are people who are digitally influenced and online shoppers. And if you look at any market, the top bucket, which is the digitally influenced and the online shopper, is the smallest. And the B is the biggest, which is digitally influenced and not online shopper, and C is the largest, right? And as people are moving from B to A, people are moving from C to B. So if we want to go and give specs to 600 million people, then the only way to do that is, there are 800 million people who have phones, maybe 350, 400 million have smartphones, but eventually a lot of these people will have smartphones. Second, what I figured out is that there are three things that are super crucial. At the end of the day, if we build business to build a channel, Lenskart is an online eyewear company, then the value proposition is very weak. So one is with technology. What you can do in 50 years, you can do in 5 years, right? And we have seen that. I mean, we are 7 years old now. We are going to ship 7 million specs this year, right? Which would be, the largest optician in India would ship half of that, right? And it wouldn't have been possible without technology. Second, consumer experience is the bottom line, right? And good is not good enough anymore, right? The bar keeps changing every year. And any company which gets comfortable that this is the bar, is the one which is suffering because, and third is the value proposition has to be stronger, which is you can't just be that I'm online and I can deliver 2 days earlier. At the end of the day, consumer is asking for, why should I buy? Which is where, the backward direct to consumer really helped us. Manufacturing, providing great quality spectacle so omni-channel I feel is, is a way to get there. And I genuinely feel that if you're going to spend $10, $20 acquiring a consumer, I don't see how the math works for you to ever become profitable. No offense, but eventually it has to get to a certain scale. And I know Amazon is moving into that route because our effective conversion on that traffic,
Amazon is moving into what, sorry?
omni-channel, I believe, in
Yeah,
US.
but if you ask Amit, he would say no, we're not.
But what I'm saying is, if my online conversion pure is just 4%, my effective on omni-channel conversion is 15% plus. And we transact some 25 spectacles per day per store, whereas the average for the country is 4. And that wouldn't have been possible, you know, so I think that's where it's just solving the problem. I think omni-channel is
Okay.
just a means to
Nandan,
get
I want
there.
to come back to you and talk a bit about the role that government and policy can play while you lay out the infrastructure in the pipeline. A lot of times that infrastructure, regulations rather, do not keep pace with the infrastructure that you've laid out. And we've seen that happen across multiple areas. Tell me, what really needs to sort of happen in terms of policy making to facilitate this next few 100 million people to not only get online but also transact, do business, and benefit from the larger internet ecosystem?
Well, first of all, I think India is uniquely placed in terms of the fact that the infrastructure, the regulations and markets have by and large been aligned. And Mr. Prasad is here, he's been a leader in that. He has led the Digital India program very well. And I think that's been a big part of it. So the fact today that we have, smartphones everywhere, 400 million, 350 million, cheap data everywhere, the Aadhaar everywhere, in the last 5 years, they've opened 330 million bank accounts. So really, this is massive infrastructure which government has enabled. And the latest thing from the government is this account aggregator framework, which RBI and other regulators have come out, which allows people to use their own data. That will have a huge impact, for example, on lending. So I think the government has actually done a very good job in laying the foundation. And in many areas, the government has been faster than the market. We think that government is slow, market is fast. It's actually the other way around.
Which ones are you talking about?
No, I think, for example, the whole rollout of UPI, I don't think people fully got it. Today, there are 100 million people on UPI, and that's making their work easier because you can just press a button and buy, or phone pay and all that. Or even account aggregator, not everybody has understood the power of what's coming. So many of these things have taken time to be absorbed by market forces. But I think it's really a good case of cooperation. Everything has been done with government and regulations, and they have led in many of these things.
This is more relevant for Amit and Kalyan. In the last 9 months or about a year, there have been policy changes which have affected e-commerce largely. Tell me, what is it that you expect on the policy front to sort of continue growing the business and sort of taking it to new geographies? And do any of these policy changes also sort of stymie your growth and slow you down?
Well, I mean, we just talked about how Bharat can come quicker digital and actually not just serve India, but serve the world, right? I gave you an example of how a motivated small business in a corner of the country can actually become a global brand. And there are sufficient use cases that are emerging just powered by the mobile phone. I think one of the basic foundational blocks of that policy should be to embrace e-commerce as a key driver of the future of the economy. And when you embrace that, then you kind of work backwards and ask yourself, what are the friction points that would allow it to grow faster? So for example, we hear from many of our sellers that if they want to do business in more than one state, there are more forms and taxation regimes that they have to deal with to get their items to be deployed in more than one state. So I think very simple changes like that can actually have a multiplier effect on what they are doing online and actually what they can do. So even if you look at people who are selling through exports, the number of forms they have to go through, the customs they have to go through, there's a lot of opportunity to simplify and remove friction and let the industry grow faster. So if we sort of work backwards and remove all those paper cuts, a policy that can embrace e-commerce as a key economic driver, and then also try to provide a little bit of stability and predictability long run so that these long range bets of capital deployment can happen to build this infrastructure that's needed to bring the 300 million, 400 people online, because all of that requires upfront investment to build kind of these highways on which things can move faster.
Kalyan, anything on the policy front which you would want the government to address and help sort of businesses?
See, less on the policy front. I'll first agree with Nandan. I think the government has been very progressive. And as Nandan pointed out, we have been a very big beneficiary of general. One of the biggest challenges in the past has been digital payments for us. A big part of the business continues to be cash driven, and it's moving to digital payments, which is very helpful. So the one thing which I would request the government to think about a lot more is R&D spending on technology. So it's lower than China by a third. It's lower than the US. I think it's 25% of the US percentage of GDP. This year, we will be spending a few $100 million in R&D and technology, for mostly driven towards e-commerce. If we can partner with the government, and if they can also lend support there, it will eventually help the industry in a pretty big way.
Okay. I don't have too much time, so I want to get on to the part where we lay our thoughts on, what are the few things that you would expect that would really sort of speed up not only adoption of internet, but also inclusion in a big way. And Aditya, if you want to come in and give a few pointers there.
Picking up from what Kalyan was saying, right? As a percentage of GDP, our spend on R&D has remained reasonably flat for 20 years now. Right? It's less than 1% of our GDP. Right? We have almost 130 million, I think, new voters who came into who were voting in this election. So let's assume they're somewhere between the age of 18 to 23. They are going to build their lives, businesses, livelihoods, and families for the next 20 years, right? So what are all the enabling factors which can create more enthusiasm and opportunities for this, demographic dividend? Whether it is science and math education, whether it is, spend on R&D, or just pure teledensity and internet density, which is a big divide between the urban and the rural areas. We were talking yesterday, yes, has the gap shortened? Of course, but it is still 1/3 or 1/4 of what it is in urban areas. Omni-channel will help us get there. Can this get us there faster is the question. I always say, and this I've been saying for 15 years because I come from an industry which also there was a disruption. Will India grow? Absolutely. How fast can it grow? Can happen when we have these sort of basic things, and then the policy enables. The policy enables us to kind of then move forward with that.
Yeah. Nandan, privacy is also a big factor, and especially so when you look at a new set of users who are coming on board, and they're not really very well versed. They're not like your first 50, 60 million internet users. Something that you want to talk about? I mean, how do you do digital literacy and make this new set of users aware for even some of the India stack things like account aggregators and stuff. I mean, as a user sitting somewhere in a deep corner, I'm not really aware what I'm giving in terms of data.
No, I think the privacy side, a lot of responsibility is also on the companies, and that the privacy laws and all which are coming up, and again, Mr. Prasad has been a key person in that, will I think lay the framework for what companies can and cannot do. I think the bigger issue is more like fraud, phishing, those kind of things, where you have new users who come online and people take advantage of their naivety to get something. So I think that's something which I think is a responsibility both for government and the companies to do something about it. But I think one thing is, which I feel is coming out, one is that the consumer experience in Bharat will have to be video, will have to be in local languages, yes, will have to be voice. That's what Kalyan was saying. And increasingly, because it's a do-it-for-me market as opposed to a do-it-yourself market, which is the top 50 million, it has to have a distribution element in it. So you need to have a physical touch point to have the full experience. Now, the moment you have a physical touch point, you need to make sure that experience is consistent. And then the inevitable thing is you go to full stack, which is what OYO has done. So I think those kind of things I see happening across the board. Even to tomorrow when, Flipkart and Amazon go deep, I think they will have to have local partners for handling maybe installation or delivery or returns or what. They'll have to figure out some way. I know they're doing it, but they'll have to do that in a consistent way. So I think all these things are all Bharat-related issues.
Yeah. Amit, I'm just curious, and I've been asking this across, a lot of internet entrepreneurs. So Reliance Jio was a big facilitator to get to this Bharat, and everyone's built on top of that. But today, from being an enabler and a facilitator, it is also in the fray with a lot of services and products. Do you think, the competitive sort of landscape is going to be different going forward, because they obviously know this consumer far better because they have had those consumers for the last 2-3 years on Jio, and they know exactly, how to cater to them when they do launch a bunch of their services?
Well, I think the more innovation, the more entrepreneurs, the more capital, the more effort is being put together to sort of move Bharat to digital, and the infrastructure is good, the better it is. I think we need all the help we can get. The beauty of the internet is it's a completely transparent world, and in a completely transparent world, customers would choose the experience that is truly superior. So I think from a company standpoint, as a company that we obsess with customers every day, we only focus on making sure that customers choose us because we provide a more superior experience. That's ultimately the only tiebreaker that matters. Other than that, I think as many companies get into this and work together to sort of build this infrastructure out, it's great for Bharat. I think it's just fabulous that so many companies, all the way from small companies to large companies, are actually getting excited about building this out. So I think it's great. And as you said, Reliance Jio has been one of the greatest tailwinds to get towards both suppliers being able to access customers anywhere and for customers to be able to access selection anywhere. So I think it's just great for India.
So I just have about 2 or 3 minutes. If everyone can give a closing remark, not think of it as a tweet, 140 words, and sort of wrap up. If it can't fit in a tweet, then we'll start from you, Aditya.
No, look, I'm obsessed with the fact that can technology solve a hard problem to solve that's going to make a difference in the lives of the people that we are touching. If it is just about giving them a new product because I thought it was better, it's about solving a hard problem to solve that exists today, which makes a difference in their lives. Then everything else follows.
Piyush?
I think when Bharat and people at all income levels demand great experience, we don't think that they need that much experience, but their 500 rupees means a lot more to them than our 5,000. And I think it's very important to understand that as we build business for Bharat.
Nandan?
I think Bharat is about high volume, low cost, video, voice, local language, full stack, consistent experience. That's what Bharat is all about.
I think what we are realizing more and more is what's good for customers is actually accelerating a digital Bharat. And it's not just doing that, it's actually also going to transform people's lives.
Kalyan, last thoughts?
Yeah, so while Bharat is the most exciting and the biggest opportunity in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe in the entire world, it's also the most challenging opportunity. So I think the ecosystem has to come together and solve it. So to your previous question to some other gentleman here, on the role Reliance has to play, the government has to play, everybody has to come together to solve it. The penetration of e-commerce and retail is negligible today. So it's a massive opportunity, but a very difficult opportunity. So I'm hoping people will come together and solve it.
Thank you, gentlemen, for an amazing, insightful session. I hand it over to Suresh.